Hello, everyone.
Welcome.
Hi, I'm Oliver.
Hi, I'm Lily.
Science and Easy English.
And today's topic is...
Your gut controls your mood.
It really does.
Okay, so let's just jump right in. We've all had that feeling, right?
Oh, yeah.
You're about to walk into a huge job interview, maybe a first date, and then bam, you feel it.
Butterflies.
Butterflies in your stomach.
Yeah.
Maybe you even feel a little sick. And we always just think of that as, a metaphor for being nervous.
Just a saying.
But looking at the research we have today,
Yeah.
what if I told you that sensation isn't poetic at all? It's a direct phone call between your gut and your brain.
It is definitely not a metaphor. It's biological signaling happening in real time.
So what are we actually talking about here?
What we're exploring today is the microbiota gut-brain axis.
Okay, that sounds like a massive academic mouthful.
It is, I know. But it's essentially just the communication highway connecting your brain and your spinal cord to the trillions of microorganisms living in your gut.
Trillions. It's so hard to even imagine that number.
It is. And just to be clear, we are not just talking about digestion here.
Right. It's not just about getting a stomachache.
Exactly. We're looking at sources today that show how these tiny organisms influence your emotions, how you handle stress, and maybe even the decisions you make.
So that's the mission for this deep dive. We're going to look at how food affects your mental health, define this new buzzword, psychobiotics, and really try to separate the marketing hype from the actual science.
Which is so important.
Because you can't walk down a grocery aisle without seeing gut health on everything from soda to cereal.
There is so much noise. And that's really where we need to start. We have to look at the numbers and, bust a few myths before we get into the mechanics of how it all works.
Okay, let's do it. Section 1, the numbers game.
Yep.
I have read this statistic everywhere. I feel like it's on every yogurt commercial. They say bacterial cells outnumber our human cells 10 to 1.
The 10-to-1 ratio.
Yeah, that we're basically 10% human and 90% bacteria. Is that true?
Well, this is where it gets really interesting. That 10-to-1 ratio, it's actually a myth.
A myth. But it's everywhere.
I know. It's one of those things that just got repeated so many times it became fact. But it actually comes from a back-of-the-envelope calculation from the 1970s.
The 70s. Seriously. Yeah. So we've been quoting bad math for 50 years?
Pretty much. It stuck because it sounds so amazing.
Okay.
It's a great headline.
It is.
But modern research corrects this. The latest estimates show it's actually much closer to a 1-to-1 ratio.
1 to 1. Okay, that's a big downgrade from 10 to 1.
It is. We're talking roughly 38 trillion bacteria versus about 30 trillion human cells.
Yeah.
So you're still basically half microbe, a 50-50 split.
Okay, I can live with being half human. But let's talk about the bacteria themselves, because this is another area where I feel like the marketing makes things too simple.
Definitely.
We always hear about good bacteria versus bad bacteria, like a little microscopic war going on inside me.
The good guys and the bad guys. Yeah, that's another oversimplification we need to address.
So it's not that simple.
Not at all. In the microbiome, context is everything. A bacterium that's beneficial for you might be totally neutral or even a problem for someone else. It all depends on their specific internal ecosystem.
Can you give me an example?
Sure. Take a bacterium called Akkermansia mucinifila.
Okay.
It's generally seen as a really good probiotic for metabolism, but recent data suggests its effects are highly context-dependent. In some gut environments, it's great. In others, it might actually be associated with inflammation.
So it's less like a war and more like managing a complicated city. You can't just drop 1,000 new people in if the infrastructure can't support them.
That's a great analogy. Exactly. And that brings us to diversity.
Right. More is always better, isn't it?
That's the common wisdom. And while high diversity is often linked to health, it's not a universal rule. It's really about balance and function, not just the raw number of species you have.
Okay, so we've busted the myths. Where about half bacteria, good and bad, is complicated. And diversity isn't a magic bullet.
Right.
So now let's talk about the hardware.
Yeah.
How does the gut actually talk to the brain?
Well, it has neurons, a lot of them. We call it the enteric nervous system, or the ENS.
The second brain. I've heard that term.
That's the one. And it's this mesh-like network of neurons that lines your entire GI tract.
And it has more neurons than the spinal cord.
It does. It's incredibly complex. It can work on its own to manage digestion, but it's constantly talking to the central nervous system.
And the telephone line connecting them
is the vagus nerve. Think of it as a fiber optic superhighway for information.
So here's the part that blew my mind when I was reading our sources. I always assumed the brain was the boss, top down.
Top-down management.
Yeah, the brain gets anxious and tells the stomach, hey, feel sick now. But the traffic on this Sydney highway,
Yeah.
it's not mostly going down, is it?
No. And this is a crucial detail. We now know that about 90% of the fibers in the vagus nerve carry information from the gut up to the brain.
90% going up. So the gut is basically spamming the brain with updates all day.
In a way, yes. It's constantly reporting on the state of things. So irritation in the gut sends signals up to the brain that can trigger mood changes.
And we have proof of this.
We do. In animal studies, if you cut the vagus nerve, it's called a vagotomy, and then give the animal a mood-boosting probiotic, the effect just disappears.
Because the phone line is cut. The gut is saying, I feel great. But the brain never gets the memo.
Exactly. The message to calm down never arrives. So the hardware is absolutely vital.
That's wild. Okay, so we've got the hardware, the vagus nerve. Let's talk about the software, the chemicals.
The messengers.
We have to talk about serotonin, the happy chemical.
We do. And most people think it's all made in the brain. But the reality is 90 to 95% of the body's serotonin is produced in the gut.
Okay, see, that stat always confuses me. If all that happy chemical is in my gut, how does it help my brain? I thought the blood-brain barrier was like a bouncer at a club.
It is. And you're right to be confused. It's a common point of confusion. The serotonin produced in the gut generally does not cross that barrier. It can't just float up and make you happy.
So if it can't get in, why do we care?
Two big reasons. First, that gut serotonin controls gut motility and pain. If it's off, your gut feels bad, and those distress signals travel up the vagus nerve.
Oh, okay.
And second, gut microbes help create the precursors to serotonin, like tryptophan, and tryptophan can cross the border.
I see. So the bacteria aren't shipping the finished car across the border. They're shipping the steel and tires so the brain can build it.
That is a fantastic way to put it. They're providing the raw materials.
And it's not just serotonin, is it?
Oh, no. Specific bacteria, like lactobacillus, produce GABA. That's the brain's main calming chemical. Others can make dopamine. It's a whole pharmacy down there.
Wow.
But we can't forget the real MVPs, short-chain fatty acids, SCFAs.
And these come from fiber. This is why everyone says to eat your vegetables.
Precisely. You eat fiber, your bacteria ferment it, and as a byproduct, they create these SCFAs, like butyrate.
And what does butyrate do?
It's incredible. It travels through the blood, it protects the blood-brain barrier, and it reduces inflammation. Low levels of butyrate are directly linked to depressive symptoms in animal models.
So fiber feeds the bugs make butyrate, and butyrate protects the brain. That's a really clear chain of events.
It is.
Okay, so what happens when this whole system breaks? Let's talk about stress and this concept of leaky gut.
This is where we see the physical damage of mental stress.
Right.
When you're stressed, you release cortisol.
The stress hormone.
Right, and chronic stress, chronic cortisol, can actually damage the lining of your gut.
Which leads to leaky gut. I know some people think that term sounds a bit unscientific.
They do, because the term gets used loosely. But the physiological reality is called intestinal barrier dysfunction, and it's very real.
What's that?
The tight junctions in your gut wall, think of them as the mortar between bricks. They get weak, the wall becomes permeable.
And then bad stuff gets through.
Exactly. Bacterial toxins, especially something called LPS, can escape the gut and get into your bloodstream.
That sounds bad.
It's very bad. Your immune system sees these toxins and launches a massive inflammatory response.
And inflammation isn't just a swollen ankle.
No. This inflammation, these cytokines, travel to the brain. And there is a very strong link between this neuroinflammation and the onset of depression and anxiety.
So let's trace it. Stress causes a leaky gut,
Which lets in toxin,
which causes inflammation.
which travels to the brain and causes more depression and anxiety. It is a vicious loop.
That's terrifying. It explains why when you're stressed, your stomach hurts, and when your stomach hurts, you feel more depressed.
It is a downward spiral. But let's pivot to the solution. We mentioned psychobiotics.
Right, sounds like a sci-fi drug. Take 2 psychobiotics and call me in the morning.
The real definition is a bit simpler. A psychobiotic is just a live organism, a probiotic, or a substance like a prebiotic that gives you mental health benefits.
So treating the mind through the gut, do we have good evidence this works?
We do. We have studies on specific strains like Lactobacillus rhamnosus and Bifidobacterium longum that have shown they can reduce anxiety-like behaviors in mice.
But there's one study that's the most fascinating, and maybe the grossest. The poof transplant.
Fecal microbiota transplantation, FMT.
Right. Tell us about transferring the blues.
This is a landmark finding. Researchers took the microbiota from a depressed human
Okay.
and transplanted it into healthy, germ-free rats.
And what happened to the healthy rats?
The healthy rats began to exhibit depressive behaviors. They became lethargic, lost interest in things they usually love. It proved a causal link. The microbes alone were enough to transfer the symptoms.
That is absolutely wild. It really makes you question where you end and your bacteria begin.
Yeah.
Are my feelings even my feelings?
It raises some profound questions, but I have to give a major caveat here.
Right.
FMT is only a standard treatment for a severe infection called C. diff. It is not something you should try at home for
A
depression.
good disclaimer. Please do not try poop transplants at home.
The risks are huge. You could transfer pathogens or other unwanted traits.
Okay, so no DIY.
Mm.
But there's a safer way to change our microbiome, and that's diet.
Absolutely. Diet is the biggest control mechanism we have.
The classic showdown. The Western diet versus the Mediterranean diet.
It is. And the Western diet, processed foods, sugar, bad fats, is linked to inflammation and reduced diversity. It's a known risk factor for depression.
And the Mediterranean diet.
High in plants, fiber, omega-3s, fermented foods. We even have randomized controlled trials like the SMILES trial.
What did it show?
It showed that dietary improvement could significantly reduce depressive symptoms. It wasn't just correlation, it showed causation.
So let's get practical. What are the dietary heroes?
Number 1, fiber. Prebiotics from things like onions, asparagus, bananas, that feeds the good bugs.
To make that butyrate.
Exactly. Number 2, fermented foods. Kimchi, sauerkraut, kefir, they contain live bacteria. And third, omega-3s to reduce inflammation.
And here's the really hopeful part, right? The microbiome changes fast.
That's the amazing part. It's not static like your genes. Significant changes can happen in as quickly as 24 hours after a major dietary shift.
24 hours.
Yes. If you switch from an animal-based to a plant-based diet, the bacteria change almost overnight.
That is incredibly empowering. But does this work for everyone? If I eat a bucket of kimchi, am I guaranteed to feel better?
Not necessarily. And that brings us to the future of all this. Personalized medicine.
Because everyone's gut is different.
Precisely. No one size fits all. The future is precision psychobiotics, where we can map a patient's specific bacteria and then prescribe a custom diet or strain.
And what's this term, pharmacomicrobiomics?
It's the idea that your gut bacteria can determine how well standard medications like antidepressants actually work.
Wait, so the bacteria might be eating the medicine?
Or changing it into something that doesn't work. We're realizing that an unbalanced gut might explain why these drugs fail for some people.
That changes the whole game for psychiatry.
It connects the whole system. You can't treat the head without looking at the stomach.
So let's bring this all home. What's the main takeaway?
It means we have to stop thinking of the brain as an isolated island. The gut and brain are in a constant conversation. Stress messes up your gut, and a messed up gut messes up your mood.
And diet is the one lever we can actually pull every single day.
It's the most powerful modifiable factor we have. We can't always control our stress, but we can control what we feed our microbiome.
It gives a whole new meaning to trust your gut. It's not just intuition, it's biological signaling.
And here's a thought I want to leave you with.
Okay.
We talked about how you can transfer depression in those rat studies.
Right.
So if you can transfer the blues, could you one day transfer resilience? Could we sort of inoculate people against stress by optimizing their gut bacteria before crisis? And if our microbes influence our decisions and our moods so much, how much of us is actually them?
That is something to chew on. Thanks for listening to this deep dive.
See you next time.